One cool thing about the whole draft process is, like I've said in other videos, at the end of the day, if you can play, people will find you. But sometimes what happens is you go through the Shrine game, the NFLPA game, the Senior Bowl, the Combine. Guys really start to make a name for themselves. Guys really start to make an impression. And it forces you to pay attention and be like, whoa, wait a second, let me go back and watch him. And you find guys that you otherwise wouldn't have paid much attention to. And one of those guys for this year, for me, was Trey Hendrickson from Florida Atlantic. This was a guy that I didn't honestly know much about. This is a guy I really hadn't heard about until we got into the draft process. You started getting into some of the all-star games and so on. And all of a sudden you started to take notice and you saw something, or at least I saw something, that I feel like teams can work with at the NFL level. And it was interesting to me, whereas so many people couldn't help themselves but fall with the media narrative about how freakish of an athlete Myles Garrett was. And in all intents and purposes, I referenced it in the video talking about Myles Garrett this year, that he is a freakish athlete. Let me step back and say that. But with that said, there are other freak athletes at the Combine, and it kind of ticked me off that all the focus at the Combine in terms of athleticism in general was about John Ross's 40 time, where he couldn't even get through a 40 without fucking getting hurt, and then Myles Garrett and everything that he did. But Trey Hendrickson, I thought, was one of those guys that potentially made himself a lot of money throughout the process because he was a guy that wasn't much smaller than Myles Garrett, ran a similar 40 time, and in general, I thought showed well in some of the other measurable drills and did well in some of the workout and field drills as well. So when I went back and watched it with Florida Atlantic, I was expecting to be really, really surprised. I was somewhat surprised. He was one of those guys that I thought maybe I was going to latch onto and be pounding the table for and saying people are massively overrated or underrating, and I don't think I quite got there. But I see a guy with some upside, and I see a guy with some potential for the NFL level. He's got good size. He could potentially maybe play defensive end in a scheme where it's based more off of quickness at the position. Some people might think of him in a Leo type of position or a defensive end in a cover 2 type of scheme. I think his best fit is still probably as a 3-4 outside linebacker where you can get him standing up and you can get him in a more athletic position from the beginning. He's got outstanding burst off of the edge. This white boy can move, period. Like, in terms of explosiveness as a pass rusher off the edge, after Myles Garrett, Trey Hendrickson is right at the top of that list, frankly, along with the Tim Williams. He's got some major, major burst off of the edge, and it jumps off the film to you. Yes, even in all-star games, but they are still games against other NFL prospects. And he's got plenty of burst off the edge. He's got decent abilities as a pass rusher. He's going to need some technique work, but with that burst comes a great motor and effort level. Consistently, this dude plays hard, especially in pursuit. While he's not much of a run defender, he will occasionally make a stop just because of his willingness to pursue sideline to sideline and even get down the field. But where his effort and motor really comes into play is as a pass rusher because he comes flying off of the fucking edge and then he just won't stop until the play is over. Right there. Decent size, incredible athleticism and burst off the edge, and plays with a non-stop motor. Those are really appealing traits that you're looking for in an edge rusher at the NFL level. Now, with that said, he needs some work. He needs some refinement in terms of his pass rush technique and his pass rush moves. He's really not much of a run defender whatsoever, so he's a guy I can envision, especially early on in his career, he's primarily only going to be able to make an impact as a pass rusher because he's not going to be a guy you want to keep on the field in the running game a lot. I think he's got the athleticism to do some things in coverage, but again, he wasn't utilized much in that role. He's going to need some work there. He still needs some work. Again, this comes into technique with getting off of blocks. He probably needs to get a little bit stronger in terms of how he plays on the field. I thought his football awareness and football IQ was only average. Wasn't the worst I've seen out of the edge rushers, but it most certainly wasn't the best. But I saw a guy that, again, one of these guys that kind of falls through the cracks, one of these guys that you don't know a lot about, but I won't say when you find out about him, it kind of comes through the shining light, but he's one of those guys that you start to like on film a little bit. In terms of a reminder for me at the NFL level, maybe somebody like a Carl Nassib coming out of Penn State. Now, he's not as tall as Nassib was, but Nassib was a guy that had pretty good size. He had even better size than Hendrickson, but he was a guy that could come absolutely flying off of the snap. Didn't do a whole lot else, it seemed like at times maybe. But I liked Nassib quite a bit, and I like Hendrickson quite a bit too, and that would just be one comparison, even though I think they are slightly different players. I think in terms of some of the traits and what Hendrickson reminds me of, he reminds me of Carl Nassib coming out of last year's draft class from Penn State. When I look at Hendrickson, I've got a third round grade on him. I think that could be the beginning of his draft range. I'm probably grading him a little bit higher than NFL teams will. I have a feeling he ends up getting drafted on day number 3. Me, I would feel comfortable thinking about taking him in round 3 because, again, with that size and that explosiveness off the edge and his nonstop motor, you feel like those are traits that you could work with, and you feel like those are traits that could potentially make him a productive NFL player.